So next up we have Zeev Suraski, a man who really needs no introduction and can probably do a better one than I could do myself. So right up, Zeev, thank you.
Hi everyone. So I actually am going to begin with a quick introduction of myself. Maybe the things that, for those of you who have heard of me, the things which you're more likely to have not heard about me. So I have 3 daughters, which gives me just an amazing excuse to do all sorts of things that I can blame them for doing, like this or that. And sometimes even they do this kind of stuff on their own. I'm a photography enthusiast, which means I have absolutely no excuse for not bringing my good camera with me here to Sydney, but unfortunately that's the case, and I had to take all the shots with this iPhone or with a GoPro, which is not a hell of a lot better. I'm ridiculously crazy about spicy food. There are some people in the audience that can attest to that, but it's not that I like spicy food. It's some sort, I'm sure there's a medical definition for the state, but I'm under it. I'm a computer science graduate from the Technion, and for whatever reason, at least in the early years, there seemed to be this misconception that me and my colleague Andy Gutmans never graduated, but we did actually graduate. I'm not sure where this story came from. Maybe because of some of the next stories. My early technological career, if we go really way back, GW Basic. Anyone here in the audience ever? Wow, cool audience. The best. No, not really. C++ CGIs. Okay, anyone do that? Someone is kind of, there's someone in the audience who's kind of reluctant to admit that they did it, and for a good reason, because it's just downright horrible. Don't ever do that. And finally, CNC, Command and Control Army Systems, and I wouldn't even ask if there are people in the audience who do that. And I did spend a lot of my time working on PHP, and among other things, I co-founded Zend. So that story takes a while, and I'm not going to, I don't have to cover the whole story, but I'm just going to give the 1-minute version of it. Any kind of car mechanics in the audience that can tell what's wrong with this car? It's too complex, okay.
It's way too shiny. That car's not going anywhere.
Okay. That may be, but the mice that are supposed to rotate the engine, that's a bit of a bigger deal. And why do I have this picture here? Essentially, the story of how Andy Gutmans and myself got involved with PHP is that we were users of PHPFI. We were working on a university project using PHPFI. We were one of 6 or 8 couples of students that were doing that e-commerce project for university, and the only ones to pick PHPFI. Everyone else was using Perl. That was back in '97. We had a really hard time defending that decision, talking to our instructor, and she was like, why are you using this thing that no one ever heard of? And unfortunately, or fortunately, I think, in the grand scheme of things, we managed to convince her to allow us to use this technology. The thing was that about less than an hour, 40 minutes or so into when we actually started using PHPFI to implement our project, which, by the way, was after we wrote a lot of documents, speaking of documentation, a lot of documents and how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is why we picked PHPFI, and this is why we picked MySQL, and so on and so forth. So we're kind of done. The decision was done, set in stone. Once we actually started coding, we bumped into some really obscure issues, specifically a syntax error or parse error that after very long minutes of looking at the code looking back at us, we realized at some point that there wasn't anything wrong with our code. Actually, the language was not accepting syntax that it should be. So we ended up looking under the hood, and that's kind of the best illustration of what we saw there. On one hand, it worked. So that car, I mean, you know, I guess it can work. But on the other hand, it was written in a very non-robust way that was really prone to bugs of the kind that we bumped into. We ended up contacting Rasmus, that was the author of PHP5. Back then, it was pretty much a one-man project. And we asked him, I have to say, not very politely, because we were young idiots back then. We asked him, you know, what the hell were you smoking when you did it this way? It was slightly more polite than that, but not a lot. He came back to us, by the way, very politely, and I'm not being cynical, really, he really was, and told us, look, guys, I'm not a computer scientist. I never studied computer science. That's, you know, it works for me. Okay, that was that, and the fact that we weren't very good students, and we didn't like studying all the stuff that the Technion threw at us, like, for whatever reason, you need to study physics and numerical analysis and all sorts of horrible things like that for a computer science degree. So instead of doing that, we decided to see whether we can do a better job at creating this language. And by the way, that, I think, is probably the source of the myth that we never graduated. But despite that, we ended up graduating. So we ended up developing PHP 3, what became the basis of PHP 3. From a one-man project, it became, within about 3 years, to a something like 15, 20 people project. Rasmus ended up accepting the implementation that we did from scratch as the basis for kind of the successor of PHP-FI. And this picture that I'm showing here, it's, you know, in every conference I go to, it's still pretty amazing just how big PHP have grown. This is the entire PHP development team, or almost. We're missing a couple of people, but we actually managed to invite and bring almost everyone who was working on PHP back then, that's January 2000, to a single geographical location, which is just, it's impossible to do today. First, it would be north of 1,000 people, no way to get all of them in one place. That's the first and last face-to-face meeting of the development team that we had, where we contemplated how we're going to take over the world, and 5 or 6 months later, PHP 4 came out. Another story before I actually go into some details about the evolution of PHP. So there are a lot of ways to measure the popularity of PHP. The number of developers, the number of websites signing it, domains, books on Amazon, conferences, you name it. A lot of different ways to measure it. And we've been measuring the popularity of PHP for many, many years, even almost, I can almost say decades. For me, the thing that drove the point home about just how popular PHP is actually has to do with a small 2-star hotel in Buenos Aires. And I know there's a bunch of Argentinian people in the audience. So this is a hotel in San Telmo in Buenos Aires, where my wife and I, back in 2008, went on a honeymoon. And we're checking in, feeling kind of like, you know, kind of jet-lagged. We've had like, some very vivid descriptions of jet-lag in the previous presentation. So we're feeling kind of like that, checking into this place, again, not a very fancy hotel at all. And we were filling in those forms that, I don't know, I think it's less popular today. Today it's all computerized, but back then, you would kind of take out your passport and actually fill out a form of, you know, who you are, where you're coming from, and so on. Head it into the clerk, and then the clerk would type it into the computer. And as the hotel clerk is typing it into the computer, he's typing my name in, and he's calling me, he's asking me, Zeev Suraski? I'm saying, yeah. By the way, my name is Zev, but, you know, close enough. I'm used to people calling me Zeev all over the world. My bad for kind of misspelling the English version of my name. So he's, again, saying, Zeev Suraski? Yes. The PHP guy? So I think it took me a few long seconds to realize even what was going on, how the hell I'm kind of in a hotel, in a lovely neighborhood on the other side of the planet, and the hotel clerk knows that I'm involved with PHP, knows about PHP even in the first place. That's pretty remarkable. For me, that was probably the strongest indication by far about just how popular PHP was. Probably also the most scientific one. And it turned out that he was building a social network for his neighborhood in San Telmo, and he knew about PHP, and that was his night job. Or, maybe that was his night job, and PHP was his day job, not sure. Again, a very strong illustration of the popularity of PHP, where even hotel clerks are using it at their spare time. So getting down to the description of the evolution of PHP, so PHP 3 was released a bit more than a year after Andy and I had sent this infamous letter to Asmus. We've been diligently developing it, then joined forces with him and several other people who joined in, and eventually released it in mid of '98. It was the first time that PHP was really a full-fledged language, and what I mean by that is you have, for the first time, the notion of expressions, the notion of operator evaluation order. Anyone here used PHP 2? Okay. So very different. The interesting thing about PHP 3 is, and it's kind of related, most PHP 3 code today, if you're not using some deprecated extensions or some really esoteric syntax, would actually run on PHP 7. So the language has evolved, and we've added a lot to it. But in terms of some of the fundamental decisions, for better or worse, they were made back then, and they're very much with us to this date. Not so with PHP FI2, which look substantially different, even though you can definitely, if you look at both, you could definitely see that they relate. Maybe the other really important introduction that we did in PHP 3 was that it was easily extensible through extensions. Previously, you had to actually hack the parser, add to the lexical scanner in order to add even just a simple function or a simple SQL extension. You just couldn't do it without it. PHP 3, we made it very easily extensible, and shortly after it was released, the number of extensions boomed, again in kind of 1998 figures, and from supporting a handful of databases, very quickly we ended up supporting pretty much all of the major databases out there and all of the major protocols, and we had a really strong force multiplier because we no longer had to develop it on our own. We had a lot of different people developing extensions for us. Now, some people don't like that I'm describing the work of Rasmus Lerdof as as an engine that has mice rating it. But I feel kind of comfortable doing it because very shortly after we released PHP 3, and for kind of a short time, we were part of it, but it was very short. And I think describing PHP 3 without getting too much into the technical details, it's kind of similar to the same car that we've seen before, just instead of nice lab rats and instead of nice lab mice, maybe we upgraded to a couple of rats, but not much better than that. It was still really, it was a really good implementation of some of the horrible ideas that existed before it, but it was really not something to be proud of. So literally, immediately after PHP 3 was released, we went back to the drawing board and we started redesigning the engine. This time it was substantially more difficult because PHP 3 was already, even when it just came out because of the long beta process, it was already quite popular, and we cared about downs compatibility. We couldn't kind of radically change the language anymore. We needed to maintain the behaviors, and we did manage to mostly maintain the behaviors. It was probably 98, 99% compatible with PHP 3. First introduction of the Zen engine, which is, with a lot of evolution, still with us to this date, a lot faster than PHP 3. A lot more modular, which means turns into being a lot more robust as well. And some other really important elements. Session the session extension, which most of us are using everywhere today, has been only introduced in PHP 4 back in 2000. Like I mentioned, first version to be really downwards compatible with the previous version, and language plugins that also are an important element of PHP to this date. Not talking about extensions, but things like a debugger, profiler, things like New Relic that were not possible to do with previous versions, or debuggers, profilers for that matter. And with PHP 4, we introduced the ability to do that. PHP 4 we felt kind of proud of, and it really boomed in popularity. I think that the main challenge with PHP 4 was that people were using it to develop fairly complex object-oriented applications. Contrary to popular belief, actually even PHP 3 had object-oriented syntax. It was just pretty bad. The syntax was okay, the semantics was pretty bad. PHP 5 was the first version to introduce the object model that we know today, which is similar to the Java object model. By the way, you should notice also that the logos became higher quality with every version. So, and here it's clean and nice and high resolution. So PHP 5 had a true object model that is with us, again, much evolved, but with us to this date. And in terms of other things, it was more like, be thankful that it's not slower. Other than the new object model, there was really nothing much to tell about PHP 5. However, we did sow some seeds for performance improvements that happened following PHP 5.0. And as you know, 5.0 or 5.x server has been with us since 2004, and it was until half a year ago, it was the latest version. It evolved 5.0, 5.1 through 5.6. What you can see here is the performance evolution of PHP from 4.4 to 5.6. This is a synthetic benchmark. It doesn't necessarily represent what real-world apps look like, but in terms of kind of raw processing power, you can see that 5 was pretty much as fast or as slow as 4. In some tests, actually, interestingly enough, specifically object-oriented tests, 5.0 was significantly slower than 4, which is why in some places you would see that people telling that 5 was just horrible from a performance point of view, but in most cases, it was roughly as bad or good as 4. But the seeds that we have sown in it allowed us to start iterating and improving performance with every version, and you can see that there has been very substantial improvements in 5.1. That's kind of probably the first version that people actually started migrating to, and then kind of more of a natural evolution all the way to 5.6. To put things in perspective, if you add PHP 3 to the list, that's where it would be. And by the way, just in case it's not clear, lower is better, okay? Shorter is better. So bench.php actually does run on PHP 3, which attests to the downwards compatibility thing I was talking about. But it takes 75 seconds compared to 2 seconds or under 2 seconds of PHP 5.6, and even just 12 seconds of 4.4 5.0. What you can also see is that we did start reaching a bit of a plateau. So we had amazing performance improvements in 5.1, also into 5.3, but from maybe a bit in 5.3 to 5.4, but then very minor performance improvements in the recent versions. And honestly, if you're seeing something here which is at the range of, 5% or so, in a synthetic benchmark, that means that in something real world, like WordPress, Magento, your custom app, whatever it is you're running, you're probably not going to notice any difference, because a 5% difference in raw processing power translates into probably less than 0.1% in a real world app. So we started thinking what we could do to make it better, but okay, I forgot about the bastard child of PHP, PHP 6. I do want to say a couple of things. Who here used PHP 6? It is It's not impossible, by the way. People have used it. None here. OK, that's good. So PHP 6 was a project that, kind of like with PHP 4 starting immediately after 3, 6 started immediately after 5. It was not as fortunate, though. The goal was to essentially take PHP 5, add Unicode. And that's it. Make Unicode as a first-class citizen in PHP. It's not that it was impossible, and for that matter, it's not that it is impossible to use Unicode or other multi-byte encodings in PHP. It was possible back then, it certainly is today, but you need to use specialized functions. And the goal was to make everything from operators through all of the standard string functions, all the way through to SQL APIs, make all of them work seamlessly with Unicode. In a nutshell, that's kind of a bit of an illustration of what that means. So if you take the German word, lowercase word, Fußball, that's double S in German, and you use str to upper, it would correctly turn this double S lowercase into two S's uppercase. I have no idea what that means. Any Greek speakers here? Okay. So I'm hoping that it doesn't say anything bad. I've been using this slide for quite a while. It's not my slide, and I will point you to the deck in a minute for those of you who are interested. That was the premise. There was one small problem. After a few years of development, where development kind of plateaued and lingered, we wanted to check, okay, how far are we from productizing this thing? And we did some performance benchmarks, and that's what we came up with. And again, actually here, lower is worse. That's requests per second, so more is better. And PHP 6 was roughly 30 to 50% slower than 5.3, which was down at Horrible. And as a special bonus, it also doubled the memory footprint because of using Unicode everywhere. So in a nutshell, you could expect a box, a server that could serve, say, 200 people. You could expect it to serve about 40 to 50 people with PHP 6 without changing your code. And essentially, we decided that this was a dead end. And if we were ever going to do it, we would do it differently. And for those of you who want to dive more into it, there's actually a specific second in history where Andrzej Zmiewski, who was the lead on that, decided that the project was dead. I'm not sure. I actually need to ask him what exactly happened in this second. Maybe that's the email where he sent to internals proclaiming the death. But those of you who want to read more about it, there is actually a nice deck that he wrote many years ago about it from his perspective, and it's pretty accurate, even though he's obviously subjective about this. You can read more about it there. PHP 7. So we're kind of going back and forward in time. We continued the evolution of PHP 5 with 5.5, 5.6, but at some point, like I mentioned, we started hitting a bit of a wall in terms of performance evolution. And we decided to try and go in a different direction, and that different direction that a lot of different languages have been taking was JIT, just-in-time compilation. Who here knows more or less, I'm not going to ask, don't worry, but more or less what JIT is? Okay, so a good half. JIT, in a nutshell, is a technology to speed up languages which are not compiled languages, like unlike C or C++ that actually compiles to machine code, languages which are higher up, like Java, as well as all scripting languages like PHP, Python, and so on, they don't compile into machine code. And JIT is a strategy that essentially just in time takes code for these languages and translates it into machine code and immediately afterwards runs it. So that's in a nutshell JIT, very inaccurate but kind of close enough definition for those of you who don't know what it is. So we started researching JIT back in 2012. And when I'm saying we, I'm talking about a person in my team who's just a wizard named Dmitry Stogov. And after about a year, maybe even a bit more than a year, we reached essentially this. I think you should be able to see it. You have two versions. The JIT off is more or less equivalent to 5.6, and the JIT on is with this new technology. And these are subtests of the synthetic benchmark, and you can see that it's actually quite impressive. So if you get down all the way to the kind of the bottom line, what took well over a second with JIT off took only 0.2 seconds with JIT on. That's like more than 5 times better. That's just amazing. And when you look at some other calls, some are even more impressive than others, like simple call, essentially not taking almost any time at all, and so on and so forth. There was a bit of an issue. How many of you use PHP to compute fractals? Nice one. I don't know if it was intentional, but anyway, not too many. Not too many of you do Mandelbrot with PHP or Fibonacci or implement hash tables on top of it. Most of you do web work, APIs, and so on. And when we tested this pretty amazing JIT implementation on keyword apps, and the first one we got to run was WordPress, we saw anywhere between 0 to -2% improvement. So it was actually a bit slower. And after spending well over a year on this, we didn't accept it very easily, and we tried to see what was preventing something a bit more complex like WordPress from realizing the same gains that we were seeing in other synthetic benchmarks. And we even worked with Intel to get down to the chip level and understand what was going on in there. And we didn't have conclusive results of what was preventing us from cracking the performance barrier there. But we seem to all agree that if we had more compact data structures, so all of the different data structures, mainly the main data structure of PHP is called the Zeeval, Zen engine value, as well as other data structures like hash tables and so on. If we managed to reduce them significantly, we believed that this would allow the JIT implementation to actually realize performance gains also on slightly more complex workloads like WordPress. And of course, WordPress is, generally speaking, it's even fairly simple PHP code. In other more complex things like framework-based applications and so on, things were even worse like that. So post-JIT, we decided to essentially take the JIT implementation aside, freeze this work that we've been working on for more than a year, and go back to the 5.6 code base, or actually the 5.5 code base back then, and try to make the data structures more compact, which may sound easy. I don't know how it sounds to you, but it's actually horrible work. It's really difficult. You need to, any tiny change you make to a data structure in PHP, especially the Zeeval, means that you need to fix tens of thousands of lines of code in order to make it work. And back in January of 2014, which is not that long ago, just over 2 years, we split from mainstream PHP, and we decided to focus just on one thing of making the data structures more compact. Mind you, we didn't have very high expectations for that. For us, that was kind of step one on a very long journey where we would need to re-implement JIT on top of that in order to see actually any value. Within about 2 months, which was well ahead of our expected schedule, we managed to get the core of PHP compiled without any extensions. And we did manage to run bench.php, and it was showing us some interesting results. More on that in a second. And within a couple of more months, we actually managed to run WordPress on this compacted version. Now, remember this wizard. I think that he's based in St. Petersburg, Russia. I'm not next to him, but I can imagine what he must have felt like when he saw the first benchmark of WordPress and what it must have looked like. He doesn't smile a lot, and I'm not very good with Photoshop, but I can imagine it would look something like this, maybe slightly nicer. We've started seeing pretty substantial performance gains just from making the data structures more compact. And when I'm saying pretty substantial, I'm talking about anywhere between 20 to 30% just from this stage one of compacting the data structures. To us, it was a huge surprise, even a shock, because again, we were planning to do this as an enabler for JIT, and we ended up seeing that we're getting some amazing performance gains just from doing this step one. So we went public with it. We moved from a POC to a public community project. We thought that we can get to JIT later, but we can and probably should productize and release this even before doing JIT. And by August, we merged it back into the PHP source tree, and this became the basis for PHP 7 in a near unanimous vote. For whatever reason, 2 people voted against it, but most did not, and this is the basis of PHP 7. Now, since we had this 20–30% gain, we kept on improving it, and you can see here that I haven't connected my power supply. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So you can see here that from the point in time where we started measuring and until the end of 2014, we made a lot of progress, a lot of iterative progress. So it wasn't just those initial changes that we made. We continued to make the data structure more compact. We added additional types of optimizations. We made them not just more compact, but also more efficient. And you can see, again, this is WordPress. This is, in seconds, the amount of time that it takes to run 1,000 WordPress requests, which went down from early on in the project from 27 or so seconds all the way down to about 12. So at the end of the year, we had something that ran real-world workloads, and not just WordPress, by the way, but real-world workloads roughly twice as fast. And that's huge. It's amazing. It's pretty much unprecedented if it wasn't for PHP 3. And also in synthetic performance benchmarks, it was even better than that. Just to another anecdote that I even find amazing, the WordPress homepage, and again, it's not a very complex app. In PHP 5.6 takes about 10 billion opcodes. Your CPU works really hard to serve even a simple hello world page. At the end of the year, we managed to trim it down to only 2.4 billion CPU ops, and today it's even way less, which is still a lot. It's still working hard, but in comparatively speaking, it's a lot better. So these are some of the technical changes. The biggest change is that we managed to get the Zeev down from 24 bytes to 16, but then in addition to that, we made the hash tables a lot more compact. And the memory manager became, first it had to manage less memory, but it also, we've optimized it as well, and the overhead of memory management in PHP 7 is 4 times better compared to PHP 5. So, what's in it for you guys moving to PHP 7? So, a bunch of things. First of all, it's really fast. I hope that I've managed to establish that, but I'm going to continue doing this for a bit more. So this is the synthetic benchmark going down from about 2 seconds to 0.7 or 0.8. And this is what we care about a lot more, real-world apps. So we have a Zen Framework skeleton app, a Laravel skeleton app, both of them showing more than twice better performance. Even more reward, SugarCM, Magento, Drupal, MediaWiki, WordPress, all of them showing kind of on the low end 70+% performance gains. And this is with 0 changes. It's pretty amazing. I can't, and by the way, if you can, I would love to hear about it after, at the break. I can't recall any software upgrade anywhere, not just in the PHP world, where we just deployed a new version and everything started running twice as fast without you having to do anything in order to do that other than upgrade. So that's pretty remarkable. How many of you are using HHVM or have considered using HHVM? So even if I put HHVM into the equation, PHP 7 is typically as fast and in many situations faster than HHVM. It's especially visible for a variety of reasons in modern frameworks like Laravel, like Zen Framework 2, like Symfony, where you can see that it's substantially faster. Everything here, all of the numbers are compared to PHP 5.6. There are situations where HHVM is faster. Specifically, the only app I'm aware of where it's faster is MediaWiki. But Facebook actually closely worked with MediaWiki. MediaWiki is the app and the foundation behind Wikipedia. They've worked very closely together with them, so I'm assuming that there are some specific optimizations for that workload. But for the most part, with PHP 7, performance-wise, it's typically either as fast and often faster than HHVM, especially if you're using modern frameworks, which many of you, I'm sure, are. About a month ago, a Russian company named Baidu, it's not the Chinese Baidu, it's a Russian company named Baidu, published a case study about moving to PHP 7, a very detailed case study. I do recommend that you actually take a look at it. And they've seen some amazing performance gains. The gist of it is that they actually shut down half of the servers. They trimmed down the servers by half. And you're seeing here the average memory utilization of scripts going down from 35, 40 megabytes to 5 megabytes. It's ridiculous. 7 times better memory footprint. And this is after they reduced the number of servers in the cluster by half. The response times they were getting were actually better. The CPU load in this graph was actually lower, even though they had half as much hardware. So Rasmus calls this black magic, and I tend to agree. It's quite remarkable. They do have some dollar figures estimates there as well. In addition to all the good stuff that you can get performance-wise with PHP 7, there are a bunch of new capabilities. The first one is that you can, with PHP 7, you can easily recover from errors. By the way, how many of you are already using PHP 7? Okay, quite a few, but still nowhere near the majority. So you can easily recover from errors that previously you would have to use an error handler to recover from. In PHP 7, you can use much nicer syntax, and I assume that this will make catching a much wider variety of errors much more common. Return type declarations, you can, in addition to type hints for incoming arguments, PHP 7 added return type declarations, optional of course, and scalar type hints, which personally I don't like, and I personally recommend that you don't use them, but they are available. There's actually 2 flavors of them available, and I would recommend using the third, which is no type hints at all. I don't want to get into this. I probably lost a couple of years of my life just mentally on this discussion, so I'm not going to get into that. If you want after the break, we can. I can't say that I'd love to discuss it, but I'm willing to. Zero cost assert, that's actually quite big. Assert has been with us for a while. I can't even remember since when, but you couldn't or you didn't really want to use it throughout your code because it actually, even when you're in production, it would have a performance penalty. In PHP 7, it's a language level construct, and when you disable evaluation of assertions, it's practically zero cost. So you can now put assertions all throughout your code to verify things are not breaking during development, and then in production, turn it off and essentially have zero downside to it. The syntax of it also improved. And there's a bunch of other notable features. There's, of course, the spaceship operator, which looks like a tie bomber. Unfortunately, it's not that useful. I mean, you would use it in very specific situations, so it's not as if you're going to see tie bombers all throughout the average piece of PHP code, but it is available. Uniform variable syntax and abstract syntax tree are things which are not all that interesting for the end user, especially the abstract syntax tree directly, but they do enable us to do, and again, especially the AST, enables us and everyone to build all sorts of nice fancy tools on top of it. So I would expect quite a few interesting tools to be available on top of PHP 7. The uniform variable syntax also not all that interesting, and for the lack of time, I'm not going to explain that part. If you understand it, great. If you don't worry too much about it. This is one of the few gotchas upgrading from 5 to 7 where the 5 syntax is accepted by 7 but behaves slightly differently. But it's thankfully not a very common situation to be using that syntax. Filtered and serialize, allowing you to make unserialized a bit more secure. And of course the null coalesce operator, which is actually quite useful. I haven't been following the discussion back then, I have to admit. I'm not sure why we ended up using the what operator, double question mark instead of question mark colon, but whatever. That it works, it's equivalent to this. For those of you who want a detailed list, and there has been the documentation team has done a pretty good job documenting it, you can find all of the new features of PHP 7 here in bit.ly/PHP 7 news. Going forward, so PHP is really seriously uncentralized these days, and anyone can propose new features and new capabilities. From my point of view and our point of view in my team, we're going to be continue to focus on performance. We're going to reevaluate JIT and see if we can get it to actually squeeze even more performance for us. And as far as the rest of the community, the sky's the limit. I'm hoping, again, that's my personal preference, not too much additional language clutter, but we'll see. And those of you who want to kind of be with a finger on the pulse, you can join internals and see all of the discussions are happening there, but you should go fairly thick-skinned. Be advised before going there. It's not too bad, but it's also not, how do they call it? It's not a safe space, as they call it these days. Last, but, well, almost last. This guy is traveling with me all across the planet. It's a story on its own, but it's the one golden PHP elephant. I didn't create it. I actually managed to outbid everyone on eBay to get it. It was a prototype that was supposed to be productized, but long story short, it wasn't. So it's the one of a kind. You're welcome to visit it. And do we have 2 minutes left, or are we completely done? 3 minutes. Oh, okay. So let's talk about the meaning of life. So how many of you like PHP elephants? Okay, everyone who didn't raise their hands, please go out. How many of you have seen the stop-motion elephant movie introducing PHP 7? Okay, now let me just find the plug, the audio plug. Where is it? Oh, there it is. That might be a bit noisy when I plug it in, so be advised. Okay, not too bad. Let's see. If you want to tell someone what PHP 7 is without this presentation, send them here.
For many years, I've been running all of your PHP apps. I've been running your Zen framework apps. I've been running your Laravel apps. And I've still been running all sorts of custom apps. Apps that come in all shapes and colors. Apps that do all sorts of interesting things. Content management, e-commerce, mobile backends, wikis, Zero, you name it. And yes, often I also run your legacy apps. Not complaining though, I also get to run your flagship ones. Whoops, time to run. I have to say that lately, it's been getting kind of tough to handle all this load. Thankfully, the folks at the PHP project came to the rescue and happy to introduce you to my successor, the PHP 7 elephant. It's brand new, it's awesome, and it's store codes. It runs twice as fast as I can. And it consumes half as much memory as I do, allowing you to serve twice as many concurrent users at the same time. Your flagship apps will fly on it, and so will your legacy ones. After years of development and months of testing, countless apps to ensure they all work fine, I'm happy to say that whatever web app you have now, or whatever web app you intend to develop going forward, PHP 7 is up for the job.
Notice the flying elephants, right?